Lakota tribe. The Lakota are a Native American tribe, also known as the Teton Sioux. They are one of the three prominent subcultures of the Sioux people. Their current lands are in North and South Dakota. They speak Lakota, which may mean allies or friends. It comes from the Teton word Lakota. The Sioux tribes, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, were once given the name Nado-Iziwag, which means little adders, snakes, by their enemies, the Ojibwe. The French mispronounced the Ojibwe word as Nadwisu and shortened it to Sioux, the name by which the tribes are collectively known. Because the name was intended as an insult, many of the people dislike being called Sioux. At one time the Great Sioux Nation extended from the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming to eastern Wisconsin. Their territory stretched from Canada, in the north to Kansas in the south. The Lakota occupied an area in western Minnesota around the Great Stone Lake. In the mid-1700s the Lakota moved from Minnesota to the Black Hills region of western South Dakota, eastern Wyoming, and eastern Montana. In modern times they live on the Cheyenne River, Lower Brule, Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Crow Creek, and Standing Rock reservations in North and South Dakota, and at Fort Peck Reservation in Montana. In the 1990 U.S. Census, 46,943 people identified themselves as members of Lakota Sioux tribes. An additional 44,354 people simply identified themselves as Sioux. The 2000 census indicated that 113,713 Sioux lived in the United States. Of that number, 69,722 lived on Lakota reservations, although the total population on some of these reservations also included people with Dakota or Nakota heritage. Canadian statistics in 2001 showed 3,880 Sioux. Before they moved to the Great Plains in the mid-1700s, the Lakota were part of the Dakota tribe and lived as woodland farmers in present-day Minnesota. Warfare with the Ojibwe divided the Dakota into three groups. The group that moved westward onto the Great Plains came to be called the Lakota. The Lakota acquired horses from neighboring tribes and adopted the Great Plains lifestyle. They depended on the buffalo for food, clothing, shelter, weapons, and household objects, and followed the herds on their annual migrations. Though their migrations differed from their relatives, the Nakota and Dakota who were more settled, the Lakota considered these groups allies and did not fight against them. During the late 18th century, the Lakota divided into 7 bands and scattered throughout the region. After forming alliances with the Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho, the Lakota became a powerful force on the northern plains. The years from 1775 to 1868 are sometimes called the tribe's Golden Age. In 1804 American explorers Meriwether Lewis and William Clark reached present-day Pierre, South Dakota. President at that time, Thomas Jefferson, had sent Lewis and Clark to find a waterway to the Pacific Ocean. Lewis had orders from the president to seek out the Sioux, make a good impression on them, and secure them as allies. The first meeting ended with misunderstandings on both sides. At the second meeting the Brule band was celebrating a victory over the Omaha tribe and treated Lewis and Clark to a performance of the first scalp dance ever seen by Americans. But after the Lakota expressed displeasure at the gifts Lewis and Clark gave them, relations soured. Lewis wrote that he found the Sioux to be the vilest miscreants of the savage race. The Sioux did not realize it then, but Lewis and Clark's visit foretold the U.S. intent to claim Sioux territory. Fur traders followed Lewis and Clark, and word spread in the east about the vast new lands. In 1825 the government sent soldiers to impress the Native Americans with American military might and to negotiate treaties. In 1825 treaties were signed with 3 Lakota bands. The United States claimed the right to control trade in the region and agreed to protect the Lakota and their property against white trespassers. The Americans also agreed to receive the Native Americans into their friendship, and to grant them such benefits and acts of kindness as may be convenient, in the eyes of the President. Chief Wabasha expressed his wish that this peace will last a long time. The Lakota enjoyed trading with American companies for goods that made their lives more comfortable, such as guns and cooking utensils. Unfortunately, the newcomers brought diseases and alcohol, or the water that makes men foolish, as the Lakota called it. The tribe grew increasingly dependent on American goods and experienced epidemics. Until the 1840s, relations between whites and Native Americans on the Great Plains remained fairly peaceful. Then wagon trains headed west. More and more white settlers crossed Lakota territory and drove away the buffalo. The tribe was forced to expand their hunting territory, and this took them closer to the lands of their enemies, the Kiowa and the Crow, and made them targets for attacks. The tribe tried to discourage the pioneers. They threatened, they robbed, they attacked wagon trains, but nothing stopped the westward flow. In 1850, the U.S. Congress offered to make treaties with the wild tribes of the prairies. Word was passed among the western tribes that representatives of the Great White Father, the American president, wished to talk peace at Fort Laramie, Wyoming. Thousands of Native Americans gathered at the fort, many of them starving because the buffalo were nearly gone. The Lakota signed the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, which recognized their rights to more than 60 million acres of land, including the Black Hills. In return, the tribe guaranteed safe passage of settlers on the Oregon Trail, an agreement that would end their way of life. The terms of the treaty were not kept for long. Violence erupted as tribes battled with each other over trade disputes and access to hunting grounds. Meanwhile, the U.S. Senate changed the terms of the treaty. Instead of annual payments to the tribes for 50 years in the form of cattle, farming implements, seeds, and grains, the Senate decided to make annual payments for only 10 years. For a few years, settlers passed through Lakota lands unmolested. Then in 1854, a warrior named High Forehead spotted a lame ox at the end of a wagon train and shot it for food. A few days later, the commander of Fort Laramie tried to arrest High Forehead, but he refused to surrender. In the bloody battle that followed, the commander, his troops, and a Lakota chief named Conquering Bear were killed. The U.S. government sent 1,300 armed troops, who attacked a Brule camp and murdered 86 men, women, and children. None of the dead had played any part in the lame ox incident. The Lakota had never experienced a loss of such magnitude. Confused and upset, they headed for the Black Hills. In 1857, thousands of Sioux gathered in the Black Hills and vowed to protect their lands from the whites. But gold was discovered in Colorado in 1859, and by 1861 rumors indicated there was gold in Montana, too. Traffic increased on the Oregon Trail and on the Bozeman Trail into Montana. As settlers passed through, many stayed and explored the Great Plains and prairies of the Lakota hunting grounds. War seemed unavoidable. The Sioux Wars began with the Dakota in Minnesota in 1862. Survivors fled to Lakota country, where they joined battles against U.S. soldiers. Across the West, Native Americans fought white soldiers, who had orders to attack and kill every male Native American over 12 years of age. Women and children were not spared either. In 1865, Congress decided to build roads into the Montana Gold District where the Lakota hunted, and to make peace with the Native Americans. Some Lakota groups who were starving signed treaties, but many thousands of Lakota warriors remained hostile toward the U.S. government. Their leader was the powerful and respected warrior Red Cloud. When he learned the Americans were talking peace while building forts and planning roads along the Bozeman Trail, the famous warrior declared, "I am for war." Red Cloud's War, also known as the War for the Bozeman Trail, lasted from 1866 to 1868. Crazy Horse, and other Lakota warriors led attacks against soldiers in American forts, outsmarting them at every turn. The U.S. government finally admitted defeat. In the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, the Lakota received title to the Great Sioux Reservation, which occupied half of present-day South Dakota, west of the Missouri River and including the sacred Black Hills, as well as the Bighorn Mountain region of Wyoming and Nebraska. The Lakota were also given tools, cattle, and other materials designed to convert them into farmers and ranchers. Gold was discovered in the Black Hills in 1874, and miners and settlers again trespassed on Lakota lands. Responding to citizens' demands for more land, the U.S. government tried to buy the Black Hills. Lakota leaders refused to give up the land they held sacred. Crazy Horse said, "One does not sell the earth upon which the people walk." Hunkpapa Sioux Chief Sitting Bull stated, "We want no white men here. The Black Hills belong to me. If the whites try to take them, I will fight." In 1876 the U.S. Army tried to force the Lakota to become farmers and to give up land. Intense fighting followed in the War for the Black Hills, also called Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse's War. Some of the most famous battles in American history were fought during this war. In 1876 the Lakota scored victories at Powder River in Montana, at Rosebud Creek in South Dakota, and in the valley of the Little Bighorn River in Montana. In the battle at Little Bighorn, which came to be known as Custer's Last Stand, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and 250 men attacked a camp of 2,500 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall, Sitting Bull's adopted son, led the counterattack, in which Custer and all his men were killed. This was the last great Native American victory on the Great Plains. Custer's defeat led to calls for the extermination of the Native Americans. Over the next 6 months the Lakota were beaten at War Bonnet Creek in Nebraska, Slim Buttes in South Dakota, and Wolf Mountain in Montana. They also lost the Battle of Dull Knife in Wyoming. By mid-1877 many Lakota chiefs had surrendered and were placed on reservations. Crazy Horse went to Fort Robinson, Nebraska, in September 1877, to forge a peaceful settlement. Nevertheless the U.S. Army tried to imprison the great chief. He was killed when he resisted arrest. Sitting Bull and his followers fled to Canada. The power of the Lakota and their allies over the northern plains was broken. On January 31, 1876, the U.S. Congress ordered the Lakota to move away from the Black Hills. When South Dakota became a state in 1889, white settlers pressured the federal government for more land. The Sioux Act of 1889 broke the Great Sioux Reservation into 4 smaller reservations. Under the allotment policy, each Sioux received an individual plot of land. Leftover land went to white settlers. In 1890 Sitting Bull lived at the Standing Rock Reservation, and the U.S. government feared that he might lead another resistance movement. The government became uneasy when the Lakota took up the ghost dance in 1890. A law forbade the dance, but by November 1890 the people performed it anyway. The Indian agent sent a message to Washington, D.C., "Indians are dancing in the snow and are wild and crazy. We need protection, and we need it now." In December 1890 U.S. troops under General Nelson Miles tried to arrest Sitting Bull. A fight broke out, and the chief and 7 warriors were killed. The grief-stricken people sought refuge at Pine Ridge Reservation, where Red Cloud was in charge, and at the camp of Lakota leader Bigfoot. The U.S. government ordered the arrest of Bigfoot. Planning to make peace, Bigfoot made his way to Pine Ridge. When American troops intercepted him and tried to disarm his men, a rifle went off. In the battle that followed more than 300 people were killed, most of them women and children. This massacre at Wounded Knee marked the end of the ghost dance era and Indian Wars. Many Lakota resisted the allotment policy, but the U.S. government pressured them to turn to farming. People who refused did not receive the government money and goods the treaties had promised. They went hungry, and many died. The tribe lost more land throughout the early 1900s as reservations were broken into individual allotments. During this period, the Lakota also lost many aspects of their culture. Their children were sent to boarding schools and missionaries tried to convert them to Christianity. Traditional ceremonies and practices were forbidden until laws passed in the 1930s restored religious freedom. The Lakota struggle to regain lost land is ongoing. They never accepted the 1877 order granting ownership of the Black Hills to the United States. Instead, they believe that these sacred lands belong to the tribe as given them by the Creator and promised them by the U.S. government in the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court awarded the Lakota $105 million for the wrongful taking of their territory a century earlier. But despite their dire need for money, the Lakota refused to accept the settlement, and insisted that their traditional lands be returned. They are still living on the Cheyenne River, Lower Brule, Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Crow Creek, and Standing Rock reservations in North and South Dakota, and at Fort Peck Reservation in Montana. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Click notification button down below, you will be notified when we release the video. Thank you.